Welcome to How to Cook That. I'm Ann Reardon and today we're looking at ice cream bread, 6-month-old steak and hacks to prevent glucose spikes. Let's start with this video sent in by Scott.
The internet just told me to put ice cream, flour, and baking powder in a baking dish with sprinkles on top and put it in the oven at 350 for 45 minutes. Let's see what happens.
It's rising.
I just turned ice cream into bread.
So good. There was a TikTok about making ice cream bread that went viral last year, and because of the nature of algorithms promoting copying rather than creativity, lots of people jumped on the bandwagon and also made ice cream bread in the hope that their video would get views too. But this recipe is not new. There were heaps of videos about it that predated TikTok, including this one from 9 years ago by Simple Cooking Channel.
I'm going to show you how I make 2-ingredient ice cream bread.
And there was this one from 16 years ago, which actually gives you a reason why you might want to try this recipe.
The snow weighed down the electricity lines and it shut off electricity to the trailer park, and everything in my freezer melted, and that included my ice cream.
This is obviously not an actual bread recipe because you haven't kneaded the dough to develop the gluten and there's no yeast in it, so you're not going to get that bubbly texture of bread. Putting sprinkles on top makes it look like a cake, but it's not really a cake either. Cake has fat, sugar, eggs, some sort of liquid like milk or water, and flour and baking powder. So in this ice cream bread recipe, full-fat ice cream is replacing all of these ingredients. To make a cake with the amount of flour they use, ice cream has enough liquid in it, but not enough sugar or fat. And most store-bought ice cream doesn't contain eggs, so this definitely won't have a normal cakey texture. See how it's fairly solid. It is quite interesting though, so let's give it to Dave to taste.
Wow, ice cream bread. Doesn't feel like ice cream. That is nothing special. It's not very spongy. It's quite dry, quite stodgy. It's not even as light as bread. It's kind of like sucks the moisture out of your mouth.
I'd rather use the softened ice cream to make a milkshake if the power was out, but that's me. Next, we have this video sent in by Eve wanting to know if this works.
This is a steak that is going to be dry aged in cheese wax. I went with New York strip. Then to use the right wax. Cheese wax is great. It preserves cheese, so it should preserve meat. I covered the whole steak with it. See, my hopes is that this is going to make the steak better. So I actually dry aged it for 6 months. Once the time was up, I started to open it up. I wanted to know how it tasted. I cooked it on the grill. And I'll tell you one thing. I was left with nice, beautiful, medium rare perfection.
That is amazing!
This was on YouTube Shorts with millions of views, and I have a few things to say straight away. Number one, don't do this. Number two, he doesn't even say if it was refrigerated or stored at room temperature. And number three, cheese wax is not used for dry aging steak. Cheese wax is going to trap the moisture in, which is not what dry aging is. Dry aging is a thing, and if it's done professionally and it's done using the proper protocols, then the microbial levels on the meat are similar at the end as you would get with fresh meat. Now, I've never dry aged meat before, so let's go talk to a professional who does this for a living. So I'm here with Mark from 32acres.com who dry ages steak all the time, so he's an expert in this. So can you explain to us the process of how it's supposed to be dry aged?
So we imported from Germany the world's best dry aging refrigerators. They allow the meat to mature under control, so it's control of temperature, humidity and the airflow through the cabinets. And it's very important to recognise that we follow very strict guidelines. We're evaluated and inspected regularly. We provide laboratory samples to labs to test for different things such as E. coli. So we're making sure that when we dry age our beef, it's to the highest possible standard. And I think there's a real wave of interest in dry aging, but people need to be a little bit cautious about the processes, and they need to make sure that they're following the highest possible hygiene. You don't want to put anyone at risk for the sake of a good steak.
Definitely, or the sake of a good video. And so your dry aged steak, we wanted to taste it, but it's sold out.
Yeah.
So how would you describe the flavour of dry aged versus your fresh meat?
Well, it's a richer flavour, a deeper flavour, but the meat is far more tender. And I think it's fair to say that you need to be very selective about the cuts of meat that you actually do dry age. The beef we put into the dry aging fridges are the highest possible quality of beef in the country.
Awesome. And you dry age for how long?
28 days.
And what would you say to dry aging for longer?
Can dry age up to 42 days under Australian regulation in a refrigerated environment like we have.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. So that's why you might want to buy some dry aged steak, because it is a lot more tender and a lot more flavourful than the fresh meat. But don't do it at home in cheese wax. I actually went and found the long form of that video, and in that video he does say 3 times, do not try this at home. But a lot of people watch shorts in isolation. They're never going to see the long form, so it's important that the warnings from that come into the long form video. It's also got heaps of other videos with clickbaity titles of dry aging and all sorts of things, including beeswax, which ended up with this result.
Oh, what? Is this okay to eat? I don't know.
If meat has an off flavour or an off odour, it's a good sign that there's bad bacterial growth there, and eating it could make you very sick. Now, Dave's tasted a lot of things that aren't good on debunking, but I'd never give him something that was bad or off because I don't want to make him sick. I love Dave, so that's not happening. We're not going to dry age steak for 6 months and then eat it. Not happening. Next, we're going to talk about how we spend our time.
Most valuable thing you might have in your life.
Majority of our lives will actually be spent at work.
I hate my job. Wasting my life and potential.
Don't go through life hating your job. Find a career that is fulfilling and does good. Today's sponsor, 80,000 Hours, wants to help you have a career that has a positive impact. They're a non-profit and everything they do is free. Just go to 80,000hours.org/H2CT. I'll put a link in the description. And there you'll find their free in-depth career guide. It's not your typical career questionnaire type thing. Instead, they look at which jobs have the highest positive social impact. They've spent 10 years researching this, and the results might surprise you. The traditional path of being a doctor, a teacher, or a charity worker aren't the only or even the best options if you want to do good and help people with your career. Instead, they've researched what the biggest problems are currently facing the world and which jobs will have the most impact on those problems. And once you've looked at that, you can then use the strategies they give you to find out which one of those career paths is going to be the best fit for you personally. If you work 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year for 40 years, that's 80,000 hours. Don't waste them. Use 80,000hours.org to start planning a career that is meaningful, fulfilling, and is going to help solve some of the world's most pressing problems. Next, Sharon wants to know if this is correct.
What you're going to do is cook your rice or potatoes fully, and then you're going to allow it to cool completely. Now, starches are a chain of sugar molecules, and when these items are raw, those chains are together. And when you cook them, the chain opens up so that your enzymes can penetrate through it and break it apart and allow you to digest it.
That's true so far. Raw potatoes do contain resistant starch that we can't digest, and when you cook it, it changes into a form that we can break down and digest.
But what happens when you allow it to cool completely is those starches will fold back over so our enzymes can't penetrate it, and it goes through our system pretty well undigested. Then it acts like a fiber, actually really healthy for your gut bacteria for balancing hormones, and keeps you satiated for longer.
So the main claim there is that if you let potatoes go cold, they turn back into that resistant starch again, so you can't digest it and it will just go through as fiber. That's quite easy to test. I can just put a blood glucose monitor in my arm, eat some potatoes and scan and see if my blood glucose goes up. Because if we can't digest it, it won't get into your bloodstream and you won't see any effect on your blood glucose. But so that we've got a control, let's start with some hot potatoes first. Raw potatoes contain about 70% undigestible starch, and if I boil them until they're cooked, that amount drops all the way down to 1%. Now let me weigh them and get 2 identical portions because they were 2 different potatoes. I'll have half of each, and then I'll eat this plateful while it's hot. When I finished the last mouthful, I then measured my blood glucose every 10 minutes, and these are the results. My blood glucose goes up fairly quickly, which is what you'd expect because potatoes are high GI, and then it drops back down fairly quickly too as the body releases insulin to make all of that glucose get absorbed into the cells so that the cells can use them for energy for things like your heart beating and breathing and walking around. We need energy for all the different functions that our body does. Now I left the other plate of potato in the fridge for 2 days, so it's completely cold. It's had plenty of time for that starch to change its form back to the resistant starch form, and now when I eat that, let's look at the results. If they are totally resistant starch, my blood glucose shouldn't go up, but it does. It goes up to a similar level as before. So where does this misconception come from? Well, potatoes are one of the most eaten vegetables in the world, and as I said, they are high GI, so there has been a ton of studies, a lot, and I mean a lot of studies about potatoes and their effect on blood glucose, and one of them found that eating it cold does delay the blood glucose response. If I put one over the other, you can see there that the cold potato had a peak that was slightly later than the hot potato. So then in researching and trying to find out why that was the case, they found out that some of the starch returns to the resistant starch form. We're talking about a very small amount though, like from 1% to 5%. It's not going back up to the 70%. It's not all of it that's going back to resistant starch. That tiny amount of extra resistant starch or extra fiber though does help slow gastric emptying, and it helps slow the glucose response, which is something that can be important for people with diabetes who are trying to keep their blood sugar within the normal range because it gives their body longer to respond if the peak is later. Okay, moving on to this next one.
I recently learned about this game-changing hack to reduce glucose spikes. So here's the hack. It's practical and easy to implement. You add 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and dilute it in some water and consume it 20 minutes before consuming some carbohydrates. And this will reduce those glucose spikes by up to 30%.
Let's test it out. After fasting overnight, I'm going to eat 2 pieces of white bread, which are high GI, and one I've put honey on, and the other one I'm putting a large amount of jam on. Now this meal should shoot my blood sugar up fast, which it does, and then we get the expected crash after the spike. Now I don't have diabetes, so my body was able to release enough insulin to quickly pull that blood glucose back down so that it didn't go out of the normal range. But you can imagine if someone had diabetes and their insulin isn't quite working properly, that's just going to spike it too high and it's going to go out of the normal range, which can then damage their nerves and their blood vessels. It's really important to keep it in the normal range because high blood glucose can just damage so many systems in your body. It's really not healthy for you or good for you at all. The next day, at the same time, after fasting overnight, I prepared the same meal, but before I had it, I drank a glass of water with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar mixed into it, which was not pleasant. I do not like vinegar in water, but here are the results. You can see here it has a big impact. See how the glucose is rising a lot more slowly, which gives the body more time to release the insulin. And it doesn't have that sudden drop off after either. It returns back to normal on a more gradual slope. This effect has been studied extensively. There's heaps of research on it. And having between 2 and 6 tablespoons of vinegar, either as a drink before the meal or as a dressing on the meal, really does blunt that blood glucose response and slow it right down. At first it was thought that maybe the acid in the vinegar was delaying your stomach from emptying and that's how it was slowing it down, but when they did tests on stomach emptying, it wasn't delayed at all. And also when they did a test using vinegar of someone who had drunk a glucose solution or had some glucose lollies, the vinegar had no effect at all. The blood glucose still spiked just as normal. So then they realized it must be having an effect on digestion. The current thought is that it is stopping the enzymes that are in your saliva, in your mouth, from starting to break down and digest any of the starch that is in the bread or whatever food you're having. So then it doesn't start being digested until it gets to your stomach. So that's just slowing the whole thing down, allowing that graft to slow down. But it does work as long as you're not having something that has glucose in it. It's going to have no effect on that. And the good news is, if you don't like drinking vinegar in water, which I don't, it works with lemon juice as well. So you can just add some lemon juice to water instead, which is a lot more pleasant, still quite acidic, but just a nicer flavour. And that will work just as well. With thanks to my wonderful patrons for your support of this channel, which allows me to do experiments and buy blood glucose monitors and all of those things to make it happen. If you enjoyed watching this episode, make sure you let the algorithm know by liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, and doing all of those good things. Make it a great week by being kind to others, and I'll see you on Friday.